Some cookies.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Northwest Community Council meeting for October the 7th. This virtual meeting, and it is the last one for Northwest Community Council. So for this term, anyway, well, I'm sure there'll be a new Community Council meeting, November, December, whenever they decide. But I will call this meeting to order. And the Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. Municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaties signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. So I'm going to do a little bit of a roll call. I'm Councillor Pam Lovelace, chairing tonight. Our vice chair is Councillor Lisa Blackburn. Are you there?
Good evening. Yes, indeed, ma'am.
Wonderful, sounding great. Our Deputy Mayor, Kathy Daigle-Gammon, there you are.
Good evening, everyone.
And Councillor Paul Russell.
Good evening from wonderful Lower Sackville.
Great to see you. And our esteemed Councillor Oathead. Tim, can you hear us?
I can hear you and see you. Thanks. Glad to be here.
Can't see you again, but that's no. I'm not complaining.
Can we try again, Krista?
So approval of minutes, September 9th, 2024. Are there any errors or omissions?
Yeah. No errors. The adoption of the minutes.
Can I have a motion from Councillor Russell?
Yep, so moved.
Seconded, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Call for the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Excellent. That motion has carried. Next, we'll go to the approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Madam Clerk, are there any changes?
There are no additions or deletions from the clerk's office.
Councillors, anything to be added in this robust agenda? Nothing? I'll move for a motion then to accept, to approve the order of business.
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Blackburn. Seconded by Councillor Oathead. I'll call for the question. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That motion has carried. We have an approval. Okay, of the order of business, business arising out of the minutes, I see none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Councillors, any conflict of interest? No. The next few items are all none. Motions of reconsideration, motion of rescission, consideration of deferred business, notices of tabled matters, and there are no hearings tonight. But correspondence, over to you, Madam Clerk. Any correspondence?
No correspondence has been received by the clerk's office.
Thank you. I will say, though, that correspondence was received previously when this item was an information item, and that has all been distributed to councillors. Yes, thank you. So there is no presentation tonight. Public participation. I understand that no one has signed up for public participation this evening. They should have signed up by Friday, October the 4th at 4:30 p.m. With the clerk's office. I don't have anyone listed.
Yep, that's correct. No one has signed up.
No one has signed up. So moving on to the business at hand and the reason we're here. And that is the information items that were brought forward from the September 9th meeting. Councillor Oathead requested the Hammond Plains Road functional plan. And we have our fabulous Mike Connors, and I think Leah Perrin is also with us to offer a presentation on this information report. And there's no motion with this report, but I will step down, Madam Clerk and Madam Vice Chair, and ask you to take the chair. Thank you. Over to you, Mike and Leah, for our report.
Okay.
Our presentation.
Hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. I will share my screen. Let me know if you see it.
Yes, thank you. You might want to just expand that. Yes, there we go. Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, good. Yeah, thanks very much. Mike Connors, Manager of Transportation Planning. Happy to be here today to talk through the Hammonds Plains Road Functional Plan Information Report that was at the Community Council meeting last month. I'm joined by Leah Perrin from Regional Planning, who will be able to help and answering any planning focused questions. So yeah, just a couple minutes to summarize the contents of that report. The origin of this report was from last October, and it asked for a staff report outlining and prioritizing the steps needed to initiate the planning and consultation process to develop a functional plan for Hammonds Plains Road. The report should include consider the following, and there were 8 different issues that were identified. And so this report has kind of gone through and talked about these issues and talked about the functional planning and process and how it could potentially be applied to Hammonds Plains Road. I'll give a little bit of background on the area and then talk a little bit about what's in the report. So Hammonds Plains Road is an arterial roadway. It runs approximately 19 kilometers east-west from Tantallon to Bedford. It's a key route both for regional and local traffic. So obviously it's the main thoroughfare for people that live in the area and the communities that it runs through, but it also plays a role in moving regional traffic given its connectivity between Highway 103 and Highway 102. So you see both regional and local traffic using it regularly. It's it's a long corridor, 19 kilometers. It's got variable geometry, so it doesn't look the same throughout. West of Pock Rock Road, it's more of a true arterial road with well-spaced intersections and access control. And then between Pock Walk and roughly Gary Martin Drive, it's more of a rural cross section, rolling hills, lower density residential and commercial abutting uses. And then as you get closer to the 102, where it widens out to 4 lanes and around the highway. So it's quite a varied corridor, but that's expected given that it's so long. A little bit on land use. So there are restrictions on development that have been in place in the Beaverbank, Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville area since 1998. The 2006 regional plan further restricted development within these areas by limiting residential subdivision, what's known as Schedule J, until transportation capacity is increased. And despite Schedule J growth restrictions that limit development in the area, there are several as-of-right developments that have been permitted to proceed on existing lots and on new lots proposed on existing public streets. There are a few key future potential road network improvements that relate to Hammonds Plains Road. Beaverbank Bypass and Middle Sackville Connector have been proposed, I guess, since the 80s and 90s, a collector road that would extend north from Hammonds Plains Road to the 101 and beyond into Middle Sackville and Beaverbank. So that project, it's been idle for a couple of years, but HRM has purchased some of the corridor required to build that road, but it's currently not actively moving. Sussex Drive is a proposed community connector road between Stillwater Lake and Hubli. That road, there's been some land issues, and it also hasn't really moved much in the last couple of years. And then finally, Highway 113, which is a proposed provincial highway that would connect between Hubli and Bedford, connecting highways 103 and 102. That project is a longer-term priority for the province as we understand it. So I wanted to take a minute and just talk about the functional planning and design process, just so everybody can understand what exactly that means. So we've done a few of these in the past few years as guided by the Integrated Mobility Plan. So looking at strategic corridors and then figuring out, or I guess reimagining what they can do to better suit current and future needs. Most of our roadways were designed and built a long time ago when the population was a lot lower, and some of our priorities for mobility were a little bit different, more car focused, less focus on moving people, and that's kind of where we're headed now. So looking at different corridors, establishing what we want to do with those corridors, and then developing options for how we can try to achieve that. So looking at if you want to add bus lanes or widen a road, what does that mean for traffic lane capacity? What does it mean for property impacts, utility relocations? There's all these trade-offs that we need to consider, and so functional planning allows us to look at all these pieces and put it all together and really understand what's possible on some of our strategic corridors. Just go through quickly some of the components of the functional planning process that we typically look at. So we always start with an existing conditions review to understand the physical characteristics of the corridor and understand traffic demand and things like that. Then we get into estimating future transportation demand. So based on existing traffic volumes, we project traffic into the future. We estimate how much traffic proposed developments will generate, and then we project that out to a horizon year to understand future demand. Next, we will establish the objectives and measures of effectiveness for the study. No two corridors are alike, and different corridors we want to try to achieve different things. So some of our corridors are transit priority corridors or bus rapid transit routes. So on those corridors, we typically try to find as many ways as possible to prioritize the movement of buses. But other corridors may be more focused on trying to make active transportation connections or increase traffic capacity. So we want to establish what we want to achieve, and then that helps guide the design process in determining what we recommend to do. Next, we would develop infrastructure upgrade options. So we'd look at based on the existing conditions review, and based on what we want to achieve, we would come up with design options aimed at trying to improve things. And so we'll come up with a bunch of different options of different cross sections and try to evaluate what those infrastructure options do to achieve our objectives. And then we would move into functional design. So developing 30% design and construction cost estimates. And then we would, I guess a big part of these projects is engagement. This is where we do the most engagement with community and stakeholders. Typically, we do that in 2 phases. The first being immediately following the existing conditions review. So we can go out in the community and get people's perspective on how the corridor is functioning and learn about their ideas. And then the second engagement phase would be following the completion of 30% design drawings, so we can get feedback from the community on what they think of our proposed designs. And then council could consider that feedback when we decide what to proceed with a recommendation. So functional design is really the first step in reimagining how a strategic corridor can be redeveloped. So it comes, I guess we develop the ideas up to 30% as described in the previous slide, and then we at that point typically go to regional council and with a recommendation. And once council gives us direction on a proposed functional design, then we move into the subsequent design stages, being preliminary or 60% design, detailed design, 90% design, and then tendering and construction. And so we start with functional design, focusing on an overall corridor, so a very long area. And then as we move through the process, those segments that we look at get smaller and smaller because the detail that we're going into is increasing. So that was more of a generic look at the process. Some key considerations for Hammonds Plains Road to consider that were requested in the report. The impact of Schedule J growth restrictions. So a summary of the area, growth restrictions and how they influence road network development. We would develop those as part of this project. As of right developments, an estimate of traffic demand expected to occur from any outstanding as of right developments on Hammonds Plains Road would be developed and summarized and subsequently used to model and assess traffic operations along the corridor. Those planned roadway connections that I mentioned, the impact of those connections on traffic volumes on Hammonds Plains Road would be assessed using HRM's transportation demand model. Street lighting was another issue that was mentioned. So a review of street lighting would be completed to determine any areas along the corridor where street lighting improvements may be needed. Stormwater infrastructure and flooding mitigation. So a review of existing data on flood modeling and assessment of existing stormwater infrastructure in the area would be completed to identify any deficiencies and associated mitigative measures. Finally, roadway and intersection improvements. So potential improvement options for transportation infrastructure along the corridor will be developed in response to any deficiencies identified as part of the analysis. A couple other considerations to keep in mind. There are a few ongoing projects that are important to consider. Firstly, the Joint Regional Transportation Agency's Regional Transportation Plan it will be considering those roadway connections that we talked about earlier, the ones that really haven't moved much in the last couple of years, but given the growth, there may be a conversation to start moving those projects forward. So that plan will consider those projects, as well as the future service communities study being completed that considers Sandy Lake among 3 other areas in HRM for development. So it will look at understanding what the infrastructure requirements would be to potentially develop, looking at different development scenarios for Sandy Lake. And those 2 studies that I mentioned, they're both nearing completion. They should be done later this year, I believe. So we'll have a lot more information that will inform what we do on Hammonds Plains Road after that. And then the Strategic Growth and Infrastructure Priorities Plan is another project that will start next year that will have that will take into consideration infrastructure in this area. Another consideration I wanted to mention was the corridor length, so 19 kilometers. It's really quite long for a functional design project. Our longest one to date was the Bedford Highway Functional Plan, which was presented to Council in 2020. That one was about 10.5 kilometers. So 19 is quite long. There could be an argument if Council wanted to proceed with a functional plan to reducing the study area, potentially doing it in phases. In terms of actually getting a project like this done, it typically would take approximately 12 months, depending on the scope and elements that are included. It's a pretty big project, so even 12 months might be pushing our luck, but it's probably achievable. In terms of resource requirements, so HRM would have to assign a project manager and assign a technical steering committee of subject matter experts to support that project manager. And we'd need to hire a planning or engineering design consultant. And, we put a pretty rough figure at about a $500,000 study to complete this work. So that's my summary of the report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thanks, Mike. So I'll step down and ask our vice chair to take over.
All right. Yes, ma'am. So looking for any questions from committee, and I see Chair Lovelace, you have a question. Go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So Mike, that was a great kind of overview of, kind of what the steps are in order to get this functional plan in place. Obviously, this main corridor that connects St. Margaret's Bay Road to the Bedford Highway was, built in the late 1950s. It hasn't advanced much. That being said, we've seen, but planning policies create subdivisions that are balloons off of this corridor road that are not connected. Kind of going back to my January 2021 motion, which was we've got to get some community connector roads in place to reduce the flow of traffic and the diversion of traffic away from that corridor, because they don't always have to go through that onto the corridor just to go get a jug of milk, for example. But when I consider your comment about the length of the corridor, absolutely, it is a long road. Connecting these 2 main, corridors, St. Margaret's Bay and the Bedford Highway. But if we consider that Middle Sackville connector road, I don't know that it's really any different than the Hammonds Plains Road from a length perspective. We know that Middle Sackville Road has been promised using the old Yankeetown corridor and some of those right-of-ways that were in place since the 1940s and 50s. So overall, we know that Middle Sackville corridor is a great idea, but we're trying to pick up the pieces and buy that land once again in order to create a corridor when we have a corridor now that is in desperate need of attention, both from flooding, lack of consistency with regards to intersections, knowing that as you said, we've got the Sandy Lake development coming on board. We've got also well over 2,000 plus units that are coming online just in the upper Hammonds Plains area. And those were all as of right, multi-unit developments. which, while the subdivisions were stopped, we're still building we're allowing building of private roads and multi-unit buildings. And in addition to that, when I think about the cost, Mike, I think you said 500,000. That's pretty much what developers are paying for their perks fees. Actually, if you add up all of the money that developers are putting forward just to pay that 5% parkland dedication fee. So I don't know that that the cost is insurmountable, considering this roadway itself is in desperate need of attention and options. So I guess, and I don't know how much time I have here, Madam Chair, so I apologize if I'm going on, but the INP was really clear that we need to address our corridors. And so while we know that traffic demand is peak right now, you can't even get on Hammonds Plains Road on a Sunday without being in congestion. So we recognize that the traffic volume is above and beyond what the road can manage, but yet we also know that dealing with under the road and the cross culverts is extremely important. So Mike, my question to you is, what would your recommendation be to to cut up those phases? Knowing that the Highway 102 interchange to Gary Martin, that we ended up with sidewalks, we had the road, widened. What would your suggestion be? Because knowing that we've got to upgrade Blue Water Road, do we just simply focus on, Gary Martin Drive all the way through to that special planning area at Larry UTEC and just focus on that as the next phase of work that needs to happen on Hammonds Plains Road? Or do you have other suggestions?
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike?
Madam Chair, I don't know who should I address, Madam Chair, through you to the councillor. I'm confused. Yeah. Thanks for the question. So, I mean, I think the most return on investment would be to focus on the busier section, the section through West Bedford. Between Larry UTEC Boulevard and Highway 102, or actually right down to Mill Cove. Given with the ferry coming, that's where I think you'd get the most value out of studying. I think there's value in studying all of it, but as I mentioned, it's tough to do it all in one go. So I think focusing on that section would be the most beneficial.
All right. I think, 5 minutes is up, but you can come back, Madam Chair. And we see a question from Councillor Russell. Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. You had mentioned, if I noted correctly, the transportation demand model that HRM is using. Was that the phrase that you used, Mike?
Yes.
Okay. What does that show as far as projections go for, well, everything in what you have as slide 5, the one that showed the map? If you were to have Highway 113 and Sussex Drive and the Middle Sackville Connector and the Beaverbank Bypass, what sort of projections, as compared to today, would you be using for that? Because what we've seen is massive massive population growth, and everybody's focus nowadays is on not just the speed of traffic. 4 years ago it was on the speed of traffic. Now it's also on the volume of traffic. So we see that increasing dramatically. And I'm just curious, what if you were to project into the future, how far into the future would you look, and what would you see that number looking like?
So the travel demand model that I mentioned, HRM's always had a transportation demand model, but we've actually have a brand new one that's just recently been completed, and that was developed through the Joint Regional Transportation Agency transportation plan. So it's a joint model between us and the Joint Regional Transportation Agency. And I can't recall offhand the year. I think it's 2031 and 2050. that it projects to. And what we use that model to do is evaluate different road network changes. So it's like I said, it's being used as part of that joint regional transportation agency's plan to see how different road links impact how people move. So for the case of Hammonds Plains Road, if you added 113, if you added Middle Sackville Connector, it would help us understand how what does that do to traffic volumes on Hammonds Plains Road, for example. So that's the objective, or that's the utility that the model provides.
But do you have any quantum of traffic volume projected into the future, or do you have any idea? No, not do you have any idea? What are the projections into the future?
I can speak. Sorry. Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to the Councillor Leah Perrin with Regional Planning. I can speak at least to the sort of population and employment numbers that have gone into the model. So ultimately, we're forecasting out population and employment out what we've called kind of like a full build out model based on what we know today. So I just pulled up a memo that I have here. So we have in that incomplete building permits, so things that have been issued but not yet been built. And we're looking at development agreements that haven't been fully built out. So if there's a subdivision with a development agreement, I think there's also larger subdivisions in there. Any of the special planning areas or future service communities, so Sandy Lake, some estimated numbers would have been included in there, as well as sort of any future growth nodes. You know, this is region wide. This is a region wide model. So you know, looking from center out to the rural, and any other major planned growth areas. So we would have, you know, estimated a number for Paper Mill Lake as an example and included it in there. In the suburban area, we've only at this point estimated potentially development around rapid transit corridors and other those suburban opportunity sites that council approved. And then some background growth in areas where no other growth had been identified. And then what we're starting to do is test those scenarios. So that brings us out to a population of 1 million people, basically, out to I think around 2038 or something. We'd have to double check. No, that sounds too soon.
Way too soon.
I'm doing this on that's way too quickly. In any case, it is like the full build out is a population of 1 million people. It's probably closer to 2050, and that's what the JRTA has been using as their base model, and then they can test different land use scenarios. And then we'll also use that with all the other service providers. So we'll work with Halifax Water, identify where there might be other places that would, you know, we might expect to see growth going forward, and estimate based on that. So that sort of population and housing, there's also employment numbers attached to all of that. So that gets fed into this regional. It would be difficult to say about the volume of traffic on a particular road without diving deep into the model, but just to give you a sense of where it's at in terms of, you know, the projections that we're using. They've all been things that we know are happening or we expect to happen, and then other areas that are based in kind of council direction thus far.
Okay. Madam Chair, is my time up? I assume it's really close.
You've got a minute left.
Beautiful. Thank you. So you had mentioned the bus rapid transit that comes nowhere near this area. You had mentioned the JRTA, that makes sense. You had mentioned 1 million people, that makes sense. What we are seeing in my neck of the woods on this side of the 102 is that it is predominantly a car culture. And this goes back 70 years from when it became illegal to walk between Sackville and Bedford. Everybody needed a car. What we are seeing out here is the car is still the ruler, and everybody is getting a car or multiple cars. We have some households now, because of the population density and the increased density, we have households with many, many more people than they were originally designed for. And each of those people has a car. So a 2-car driveway has 7 cars. I would anticipate, and this is just the start. This is 4 years into this massive population growth. I would anticipate that is going to multiply significantly over the next while. Are these roads going to be able to take care of that? Or do we have to look at every single other option that we have available to us?
So the modeling that we've done projects, as Leah mentioned, out to account for that increased population growth. So we'll be able to assess how the network meets future population. But I mean, it goes back to, the integrated mobility plan focuses on moving people more efficiently. So we think, we want to study these corridors, and figure out how they can better move more people, be it by transit, road capacity, et cetera. It's hard to say, right? But we're trying to encourage, obviously, more multimodal uses and into the future.
All right. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mike. That's time for you, but you can sign up for a second go around there, Paul. Tim.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Chair, and thanks, folks, for the presentation. Pam and Paul both made some really great comments that I was going to touch on, but there's a few things I wanted to add to this. I've got another meeting going on in the same room here. Let me just see if I can move to somewhere quieter. But the thing that comes to me, first of all, when you're doing this type of, we have dogs, when we're doing this type of a study is, I've seen these so many times over the years. We've done the functional plan for the Bedford Highway. We've done streetscaping plans, and we give the impression, that these are coming quickly and that they're funded, et cetera, and that doesn't always work. So my comment, I guess, is to set reasonable expectations with the public responding to this. The second thing is there are opportunities here. We've talked about some challenges. You've mentioned Sandy Lake. We've mentioned the paper mill. But in cases like that, there are also opportunities there for funding through CCCs, capital cost charges, that we could get some help from the developers to at least take it to that first portion down around paper mill, down around Sandy Lake. And I think the challenge is going to be that you're going to have to design this functional plan in segments, but also you're going to have to do it on the assumption that you may not have the 113, or that you may have the 113. And also the fact that we can't wait 2 years for this, a year to study, a year to debate it and plan it, and then a couple of years to fund it, because you're going to see the special planning areas like paper mill and Sandy Lake kick in before then. So I'm really worried about how this is going to be coordinated with the GRTA, but equally importantly, with the opportunity of tying this to the CCCs and whatnot that could be brought to us through those special planning areas. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the Stantec study is ongoing, and that's looking at Sandy Lake. That will provide a lot of useful information that will inform this, right? That'll help us understand what that projected demand could mean for the local road network, and then there's opportunities, as you mentioned, with development charges to help fund this work. And just to your first point around expectations, we've been doing these functional plans for a couple of years now, and we are certainly realizing that it's more challenging in terms of how we can in terms of timelines. So we'll have to be realistic on that, right? Like land acquisition, utilities coordination, it's much more difficult than maybe we originally thought, and it takes time. So I agree with you that managing expectations around when this stuff happens is going to be important.
Well, in addition to managing the expectations, and this is why it needs to be segmented, I would argue that some of this is going to have to be done pretty damn fast to accommodate special planning areas like Sandy and paper mill that could start being constructed within a year. Right?
Yep, agreed. And I mentioned earlier the Mill Cove Ferry too, right?
Well,
And
there's another thing, Milco
Yeah.
Ferry. I mean, that's going to be as successful as most people that use that, Mike, as you know, you live in Bedford, are going to be within walking distance of it down the road. We're building for the future. But for those who want to use it in the meantime, they're going to have to be able to get to and from it by shuttle, by park and ride, by kiss and drop, etc. And I think we're going to have to, the nice thing with the ferry, I guess, is we've got 3 to 4 years, which I don't believe we have with the special planning areas. But this is going to have to be a priority. I would say from Farmers Dairy to the Bedford Highway. That area, I think, is going to have to jump the queue a little bit as far as getting attention and funding faster, if you will. But also, as I said, the opportunity with the development fees and the CCCs.
All right. Thank you very much. And now I see Chair Lovelace, you are on tap for a second time around, but I'm just wondering if I could just ask a quick question of clarification from the chair. If that would be okay. Just saw that early on in the presentation, Mike, you made mention of Beaverbank Bypass, Middle Sackville Connector, and mentioned that HRM has purchased land in furtherance of both of those projects. But I just want to make clear for folks who are listening at home, both of those projects are provincial projects, correct? The Beaverbank Bypass project was a provincial project that was on the books and slid off the paper in the early 2000s. So, we're awaiting another order of government to do some of this work as well.
Just to clarify, the Beaverbank Bypass was a provincial project back in the 80s and 90s. They indicated in the 90s that they were abandoning the project. So at that point, it became the municipality's prerogative to pursue or not.
So the province wouldn't be building the Beaverbank Bypass? Because I mean, that would come as news to the MLA who I've been working with on this since the dawn of time, and we were all fully under the impression that Beaverbank Bypass or Beaverbank Connector project would be a provincial.
It could be. They could decide to pick it up again, but they indicated in the 90s that they were moving away from Beaverbank Bypass, and it became.
Oh yes, absolutely. Because I asked for a report at council with the history of the Beaverbank Bypass that just came to us back in the spring, and I don't remember seeing in that report anywhere that HRM had the ability to swoop in and do this project on our own. I'll go back and have a look, but I never saw anything that indicated that this was 100% ours. But anyway, that's another conversation for another day. I will move on to Councillor Lovelace, who has question 2, ma'am.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, and that's been my understanding as well. The Beaverbank Bypass is provincial, as is Highway 113 is provincial. Both of those projects were shelved in the 1990s, and the province has not moved forward on any of them. The only thing that the province has moved forward on, which is extremely important, is the Sussex Drive extension to Eider Drive. And that land swap between the developer and the provincial government is back on the table because the province has put money forward to that. So those negotiations are continuing. And once that land swap takes place, then we'll have a better understanding as whether or not there's more development there with further subdivision of Haliburton, and whether or not that connector road will be built. And if that connector road can even connect to Highway 103, that remains to be unknown. But that is exactly the problem. The problem is that there are far too many unknowns. And I think it really is important for us to, in the very least, put forward short-term solutions that we understand can move forward, and also begin to build a functional plan for the headway. Like this is going to be madness if we do not begin to address the infrastructure needs that we currently have, significant infrastructure deficit at Blue Water Road, which floods once or twice a year. We know that has to be lifted and upgraded, and proper stormwater infrastructure be put in place. And at the same time, where there's water and sewer, there's employment opportunities. There's denser development. And so Kingswood is now building up. It's connected to Brookline. We know that with the Sandy Lake, Kingswood North will be connecting through to the new Sandy Lake and all of the development that's happening, including grandfather development at Voyager Lake. So I would like to put forward if I can, a very lengthy motion, and I apologize for this, but I think it's time for us to act on this. And I'm putting this forward for two specific reasons. One, because we need short-term solutions and we need them now. It's extremely unsafe and the congestion is every day, 7 days a week. But the functional planning process is a consideration under the Integrated Mobility Plan, which was approved in 2017. And yet, since 2017, thousands of new units have been put in place. Thousands, not just a couple hundred, thousands. And those thousands of new units do not have transportation, so they only have cars. So I move that Northwest Community Council direct Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff report with key components of functional planning process for Hammonds Plains Road and return to Community Council within 6 months, including development of detailed understanding of existing conditions, estimation of future transportation demand, development of infrastructure upgrade options for roads and stormwater, evaluation of infrastructure upgrade options, and timeline based on the range of factors, including how they meet the project objectives, which is to manage the congestion on this road, and the necessary trade-offs, plus the potential funding sources for the design and the upgrades, including the potential widening from Gary Martin Drive all the way to Kingswood Drive, based on the fact that Sandy Lake is coming on board. The functional planning process must take into consideration HRM's Integrated Mobility Plan approved in December 5th, 2017 meeting of Regional Council, and Action 121 of the IMP, which calls for the development of strategic corridor plans for existing roadway corridors that are key to regional traffic flow, transit, goods movement, and active transportation. I so move.
Do you have a seconder?
Thank you, Councillor Outset. So again, I appreciate this. I appreciate that there's all kinds of different irons in the fire, but this is not only creating such havoc for us, our local businesses cannot get people to work on time. They can't get the school buses out. The school buses are at gridlock, which is, we've got feeder schools. So there's the elementary school is halted, causing delays in the middle school, causing delays with the high school. And we have got to get some short-term fixes in there. So I'm putting this forward so that at the very least, we can get a plan in place so that we have a sense of how are we going to take bites out of this elephant, because it's a massive project. I'm just thinking gazillion million dollars to get this work done, but we've got to begin to see where are the pieces that we can do, what pieces need to be done ASAP. We know Blue Water is number one. Plus, let's keep in mind we've got a new fire station coming on board off of Hammonds Plains Road, and we've got to have a functional plan in order to address the issues. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Any further comment? Question, Councillor Russell? Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking at the motion, and the only thing I'm questioning about it at this point is the timing. To staff, is 6 months doable for this type of report?
Councillor, as I mentioned in the presentation, we anticipate a 12-month period would be typical for this kind of project. I mean, so that's 12 months from when the project would start. Another thing to consider is that 6 months from now, we don't have any staff that are assigned to this, and we don't have any budget assigned to this either. So those are important considerations. So 6 months to do the work that's listed is, is not really feasible. I would suggest 6 months to get ready to do it, to get it into the budget for next year would be more likely, I would say.
Okay, let's. I'm going to change the question just a little bit. If the CAO said, "This is a priority, go do this," what gets missed? What other things? Where would you draw resources from? What other projects? What other planning pieces would not be developed? This is keeping in mind that we've got the Housing Accelerator Fund, the any Rapid Housing Initiative type work. We've also got the Suburban Plan coming. We've also got within Lower Sackville and slightly around this area, the work on the floodplains. Would that be touched? And what is the scope of work that would be delayed if this was to be made to happen within 6 months?
Well, I mean, with 6 months, we in order to do it in 6 months, we'd have to pull staff off other ongoing projects, right? We're doing other similar projects in Windmill Road. You know, there's several design projects. Staff would have to switch from those projects to do something like this, and then, you know, I mentioned we'd have to hire a consultant to do the design work. I mean, in terms of the procurement process alone, you're looking at a month or two just to get somebody hired to help us. So, you know, 6 months really is not feasible to get most of this work done.
Okay, so I'd suggest then that I could support the motion so long as I think I can support the motion at this point, so long as it doesn't have the 6 months time frame in there. Thank you very much, Mike.
All right. So is that are you proposing a friendly amendment, or you're just going to sit on it for now?
Let's see what happens.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you very much, Councillor Russell. Councillor, let me see. Tim, Councillor Outhead.
Thanks. I'm wondering if the answer isn't, because I think the motion, which I support, but the motion is looking for the whole big picture, which is quite understandable. But I'm wondering, Mike and Leah, I mean, my question for you is, what were you planning to do in the next 6 months to a year to accommodate those two special planning areas coming on and starting to be built? So do we need to, you know, with that old, you know, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time, do we need to carve this plan and carve this motion down into these little bites of saying the priority is going to be, we know that within 1 to 2 years, there's going to be a couple thousand people coming to Paper Mill, 6,000 people, you know, coming to Sandy Lake. And we can't still be in the middle of designing the functional plan while those foundations are being built. Is there a way to break this down?
So, Councillor, I guess our intention was to await the results of the Stantec study and the Joint Regional Transportation Plan, and we're planning to establish some capital budget to advance planning and design work around some of these areas. So that was our intention.
Which makes sense to me, and I'm happy to hear that, but I'm wondering then, how does that dovetail with this? Because the last thing we want is I want these to jump the queue a little bit, those special planning areas, but also how do you know, then is the time to say that this report, this functional plan really will really kick in from Tantallon through to Farmers Dairy. I don't want this to get lost, but I also don't want duplication.
So the mobility,
is this making sense at all, Mike? Yeah.
Yeah, like the mobility, like the special planning areas, depending on what happens with those, they would trigger more detailed infrastructure analysis that would directly consider Hammonds Plains Road in this area.
Okay. All right. So you are confident that the special planning areas are going to receive sooner and special attention?
I'm not sure about that, but I just know that depending on what the results of the studies, depending on what those show, then that would dictate what kind of work we do on this section. And it's a growing area even without Sandy Lake. So I think that I think
Yeah.
that it will warrant more study.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Good
All
comment.
right.
All right, we'll see what
All
others
right.
have to say. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Day or Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I want to support the motion, but I have the same concern just around the 6-month timeline. And, you know, there are the other projects that are coming into play. Is there, and you know, it says planning and engineering design consultant, you're looking at about $500,000 that needs to be built into the budget, right? So, and I also think that the other factor that's here is that this is the last Northwest Community Council meeting of this term with 2 significant councillors, right? Like Councillor Outfit not returning, Councillor Lovelace may or may not, in what capacity. So we don't want to lose the energy that's here that's so important to the community. So is there a way to, you know, within 6 months, bring back an interim? Like, here's the status based on what's happening with the special planning areas?
If I could jump in there, Deputy Mayor, it's as if you read her mind. Councillor Lovelace has just put in the chat amendment with to read with an update in 6 months.
Well, there you go. Great minds think alike. Thank you so very much. Okay, I'm good.
All right. All right. If you're good, I know Councillor Lovelace wanted to speak for a second time, so go ahead, ma'am.
I'm good. I take your point. The reason I said 6 months is because we're going to be entering into budget deliberations. I think it's very important that this, thank you, Deputy Mayor, that this continues to move forward based on how quickly those special planning areas are going to be coming on board. So I'm happy to put in a friendly amendment with an update in 6 months. And I'm getting kicked out of the church here as the Girl Guides are leaving. So I'm happy to call for the question.
Pam, in addition to the update in 6 months, should we say with special priorities or highlight or attention given to the special planning areas, or do we think, Mike and Leah, that goes without saying?
I think that's going to come forward from the JRTA and the traffic management, traffic demand modeling. I think we're good on that.
Yeah. All right. I see no further speakers on the chat, and the question has been called for. Therefore, all those in favor, or does Krista take care of this one?
Nope, you do.
Oh, okay, perfect. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. That motion has carried. Thank you so very much, Mike and Leah. Appreciate your time and the update. And with that, I will hand things back over to Chair Lovelace.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh, that feels very good to get that moving. We are now moving on to reports. There are none. There are no motions. There are none. There is no in camera. There's no added items. Councillors, do you have any notices of motion? No. So the date of the next meeting for Northwest Community Council is scheduled for November the 18th, 2024. And I will ask for someone to adjourn the meeting.
If I may.
Adjournment, but sorry, go ahead. I was going to move adjournment, but I wanted to thank everybody first for this incredible, this community council has been absolutely incredible to work with, and I've really enjoyed it and I've really appreciated it. So thank you all, and good luck to those very often.
Thank you. Councillor Russell, did you have something to say?
I did. Thank you very much. And thank you, Councillor Roth, that this has been a really good community council to work with. We have gotten an awful lot done. There have been a number of things that we would have liked to do, but we haven't gotten to them yet. And there is still a need to get more things done. And so we will certainly be working on that. Here's about the date of November 18th. We are having a council meeting on November 19th, where I guess that will not be the first one. I was thinking of division down into various committees. We had this discussion around the Audit and Finance Standing Committee. But everybody who is just within these 5 districts is going to be on it anyway. So November 18th should be good. Never mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Krista. Thank you, Leah and Mike. Thank you
Good night, all.
It's been a wonderful experience. I really appreciate it. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to. Thanks
We all
all.
did.
Okay. Bye. Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks all.